in the engineering business space, there's not many companies that, engineering companies that also focus on doing contracted operations or outsourcing of day-to-day operations at state and local government. We also provide that same service to private industry as well as the federal government and base operations. So if you ever drink Miller Coors, we operate and maintain those breweries as an example of what we do on the private side. We work for well over 100 governments in the U.S. on a daily basis in providing contracted operations, and most of that work is in the water, wastewater business. But we provide a full range of services if there's a function provided by City Hall other than police or fire or 911, then we have done it or are doing it in one or more places in the U.S. Most local governments, I would imagine, contract out services for something, whether that's IT or trash collection. Another very common service that's outsourced is building permitting and inspections. But there are various reasons why people do it. Most people think that cost is the primary driver, and it often is a factor. But these days we're seeing the baby boom generation's retiring, and people are losing a lot of institutional knowledge, and there's a lot, and particularly in water wastewater area, there's a lot of training that needs to be done for staff, and there's just not as many people coming into the industry as it used to be. So access to human resources is another major reason why communities outsource, as well as enhancing the level of service to their citizens. When we're attracting people to come to a city, or we're bringing on the people that are already working for a city and bringing them over to CH2M, we want to be able to attract the best and the brightest. So we typically look for a minimum contract term of 5 years. In some cases, with our ON partnerships, we've been working for communities for literally decades. So what we're talking about here in my presentation tonight is not about privatization in terms of selling a public asset such as a road or a water system to a private entity. And what we're doing, the public retains full ownership and control of all of its assets, and we really become the implementers. One of the things that we like to do when we're taking over something that involves an asset is to assess the existing condition of the asset that we'll be taking over, and making suggestions to mayor and council or county commission as to what they need to budget for facility maintenance, and trying to optimize the maintenance schedule and the life of the asset. In the case of new cities, we're bringing people to the table, and we'll talk more about that later, but most often when we're taking over an existing operation from an existing city, we're talking about transitioning the staff that has been working for that city or county. And we've done this in many different occasions, including with organized labor. We take on all of those employee-related costs and take that burden off of the city and county. We oftentimes will take on financial risk in setting lump sum prices for the terms of what we're doing, which is another reason why people like to outsource. We frequently can drive cost savings through our contracts, and we don't do that on the backs of the employees. We're a big engineering company, as I mentioned, and we're competing every day for the best and the brightest around the country with other engineering firms. So we pay competitive salaries. We have a very competitive benefits program. So our cost savings that we can bring are typically derived in other areas, and that's in negotiating large-scale purchasing agreements with vendors. We can use that for multiple cities across the U.S. We try to bring in our tools and technologies that best practices that we've learned in our other cities. We also bring, in many cases, state-of-the-art software with us that drives efficiencies. We sometimes will subcontract out what we do, and we can negotiate terms and conditions with our subcontractors. So there's a number of different contractual models for how we can assist cities. What I mentioned, a long-term operation maintenance type contract. In the case of wastewater treatment plants or water treatment plants, we will sometimes take the lead on a design, build, operate contract type for the city, and that can be over, again, the long term. And then we can combine our O&M services with several different types of consulting services, as I mentioned, asset management or other types of strategic consulting. I'll have an example of what we've done recently with that here in a minute. So, my hometown, Peachtree Corners, Georgia. You'll forgive me, I'm a little bit proud of it, so we'll spend an excessive amount of time talking about Peachtree Corners. But we became a city July of 2012. The reason we became a city was that we weren't so necessarily dissatisfied with the services of the county, but one of our adjacent cities was threatening a major annexation of what we considered to be our business park, and we were fearful of losing zoning control. So we organized around an idea of a limited service city, which really in Georgia you don't have such a thing. Our Constitution only recognizes one type of city, and that's a full service city. But this legislation was the first time that we said in our charter that we were going to undertake planning and zoning, code enforcement, and trash collection, and we would still contract with the county to provide, or other cities to provide all the other services that a city provides. We chose trash collection because we knew we could get a better rate from private providers than we could from the county. And so in terms of governmental services and fees, Peachtree Corners is actually the cheapest place to live in Gwinnett County right now because we charge a 0 millage rate. Our first year we charged a 0.8 mil, and then we backed it down to 0. So 4 or 5 months after starting in July of 2012, the city contracted with CH2M to provide all the services that the city was going to provide directly. And a couple of years later, the city decided to take over street public work maintenance, and so they've hired CH2M to provide that. I'm going to show you a little video about, a couple of little videos about Peachtree Corners.
The city of Peachtree Corners is really innovative and remarkable. It holds up to its tagline. There are so many cool and exciting things that are going on in our city right now. What's really innovative and remarkable is the fact that the city is a different kind of structure.
The service delivery model that Peachtree Corners uses is that partnership model, whether it's public-private or public-public partnership. Now, it allows us to marry up the public sector service delivery expertise with the private sector's expertise in trying to keep costs down and service up, whether it's community development, planning, zoning, code enforcement, to street drainage maintenance, to building inspections. All of those are provided through partnerships with the private sector. It's allowed us here at the city to provide a high level of service, but with a lot less overhead.
You know, as a state representative here in Georgia, one of the things we look to create in our cities and counties is cities just like Peachtree Corners, where you have great jobs, great places to work, live, and play. And Peachtree Corners has been able to successfully build that model right here in Georgia.
When we took over the local street system as an asset, we undertook a geospatial asset inventory of that asset, and I'll show you a little video about that.
17.37 square miles, 41,000 people, 1 LiDAR truck. Welcome to Peachtree Corners, Georgia, smart city of the future. Every city needs to keep track of all the things that make it run smoothly. Roads, light posts, street signs. To make things easier, Peachtree has employed a technology called LiDAR to help them do this more accurately than ever before.
LiDAR is a combination of two words, light and radar. The LiDAR truck is a cool piece of technology. Looks like a piece of spaceship equipment that shoots LiDAR in 360 degrees, and we're able to locate things geographically through light combined with radar technology.
LiDAR generates 3D city maps. The information gathered from this ripples through every aspect of what makes Peachtree run.
LiDAR creates living, breathing database of assets.
Field technicians can use these maps to pinpoint power outages. It allows the city to map out and protect its natural resources. These maps allow cities to plan smart.
The LiDAR data is a gigantic database, and what allows us to share it with our crews, our staff, and everyone at City Hall, as well as the many residents in Peachtree Corners, are the Microsoft solutions we use.
Microsoft solutions power Peachtree's technology transformation, providing reliability, security, and flexibility. And now, Peachtree is a model for the world.
City of Peachtree Corners is one of the first to use LiDAR technology from the ground.
We're very proud of this project and the results that we're going to see for many years to come.
And then, as Rick mentioned, probably the most famous contracted operations city in the U.S. is Sandy Springs. So I've edited together a little video about Sandy Springs.
Sandy Springs has no long-term liabilities. Has no long-term liabilities.
Local governments across the country are failing their citizens. Mired in debt and unfunded pension obligations, more and more cities are cutting services and raising taxes. According to the National League of Cities, American municipalities will likely face a shortfall of between $60 and $80 billion between 2010 and 2012. But in Sandy Springs, a city of 100,000 people on the north side of Atlanta, something extraordinary is happening.
In comparison to all these other cities and counties that are having to furlough and are having these terrible pension problems, our situation is excellent.
Ava Galambos is a former economist and the mayor of Sandy Springs, Georgia. A few years ago, Galambos and the Committee for Sandy Springs set out to create a completely new kind of city, a fiscally accountable city whose goal it is to provide quality services at a reasonable price. Longtime Sandy Springs resident Oliver Porter was also a member of the Committee for Sandy Springs.
The responsibility for actually implementing the city fell on my shoulders.
Porter is a retired corporate executive, an artist, and the author of 2 books on how to create a 21st century city. This is the story of Sandy Springs, Georgia, the city that outsourced everything. Five years ago, the Sandy Springs community was an unincorporated part of Fulton County, Georgia.
For many, many years, Fulton County ruled us from downtown Atlanta.
We were taxed heavily, and being a more affluent community, more of the taxes were gathered here, and then very little of the money was being spent here.
So the people in Sandy Springs got pretty tired of this. We wanted local control. We wanted to have a voice in our own government, and we wanted to keep our local money at home.
In Georgia, the state legislature must authorize a referendum before a new city can incorporate. In the summer of 2005, Sandy Springs' decades-long fight for independence finally paid off.
Now, Mayor, tell us a little bit about Sandy Springs, Georgia, and how your town decided to privatize most of its services.
Sandy Springs incorporated in December 2005. We're a city of about 95,000 people directly north of the Atlanta city limits. When we became incorporated, we made the decision that we would outsource all of our services except for police and fire. And we have followed that model, and we're very satisfied with it, and we think that we are more efficient than other cities around us. We have fewer employees, and we provide excellent services.
Now, as a result of your actions, how is your town doing financially?
We are charging exactly the same property tax rate that was charged before we became a city. In other words, there's not been a tax increase. And yet we've been able to pave something like 100 miles of road that had never been paved by the county before. We've been able to put in 15 miles of sidewalks. We've added new parks. Our citizens are ecstatic with the services they're getting, and we are getting ready to create a downtown park and a city hall. And we've done it all on the same tax rate we had before we became a city.
Sandy Springs, Georgia has high hopes and high aspirations. In 2005, Sandy Springs finally gained city status after a 30-year struggle. Its plan to create a 21st century government model by outsourcing a range of municipal services to private sector company CH2M Hill.
We realized that our legislation had passed for the city of Sandy Springs. We started focusing, well, how are we going to run this city? We were all attuned to the private sector anyway. That is more or less the tenor, I think, of this total community anyway. So it just made sense to us that in terms of speed and in terms of efficiency, that was the way to go.
As we went through our prioritization and goal-setting processes, it became very clear early on that our citizens expected that we provide government services a different way. The expectation was that customer service would be at the top of the pyramid, and that's our overarching theme, is that we're here to provide good customer service.
At the heart of that ethos is a 24/7 call centre, which handles 17,000 calls per month. Being able to reach a live person whenever residents call is one of the biggest changes of the new government.
It's a call center that is highly trained, and so if a person calls in and has a problem, the call center knows to whom the call needs to be directed. And so then we keep track of those calls and make sure that all the inquiries get answered, and that's monitored. So the people feel this is a very responsive system because they get an answer to their questions, which is unusual in government.
Responding to customer need, the City Council and community have adopted 4 goals and priorities: public safety, transportation, a parks and recreation programme, and improvements to infrastructure, including new paving on the streets, stormwater requirements and traffic light synchronisation. In its first year alone, the Public Works Department completed 3,000 work order requests.
One of the most amazing things about the Public Works Department is that they've taken the same amount of width of a road and put additional lanes into it. And that has moved traffic. Without a lot of capital expenditure, we've been able to increase the number of lanes.
Public safety is also high on the agenda, with the establishment of a new city fire and police department, with twice as many police officers being deployed on the streets.
We've seen a significant improvement in response time, as well as a dramatic reduction in Part 1 crime, so we have a safer community. We have a police presence that's in our neighborhood that we have not had in years past, so we're very pleased with that. We've been able to start an EMS-based fire department where we saw incidents of cardiac arrest survival rates increase from less than 1% to over 13% in 1 year.
But it's not just local residents who've seen a significant improvement in government services. The business community have also benefited from the city's newfound status.
Having a business in Sandy Springs is a good value because you have access to the government. Here you have access to the administrative support of the government, which CH2M Hill has been doing. And the access is much greater than it was when it was an unincorporated area in Fulton County.
It's this streamlining and efficiency that has proved so successful in Sandy Springs. And with a reserve of $13 million at the end of 2007, the city is delivering real value for money for its citizens. So much so that other cities in the metro Atlanta area will follow Sandy Springs' lead and outsource their government services.
The Sandy Springs private service contract concept has worked because we were able to recruit the top-notch professionals, give them a clear mission, and deploy very quickly. In the governmental setting, it would have taken 2 years to accomplish the same thing we did in 100 days.
We've been very, very pleased. We feel that our services are more efficient at a lower cost than if we were running a typical civil service. We have more flexibility. We have the ability to reach out to their staff at a higher level for specialized services. And we have a way of sharing with the other cities if you don't need somebody full-time. And it's just more efficient. The services have just improved tremendously, and the people see it.
So that's end of my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
What would you say are your probably two biggest challenges?
Public understanding of how what the model does do and what it doesn't do. I think there's a lot of misconception about who remains in control when communities consider this type of operation, and then how the existing employees transition over from being a public employee to a private sector employee. And we run into this, when you're creating a new city, people automatically think that must mean more taxes, but it doesn't automatically. So it's just, there are perceptions out there, and with social media and stuff these days, it's an effort to try to overcome some of those perceptions.
One of the benefits of contracted services like this is because you're introducing market competition, where today a city or a county, they have their own staff administration, which is a monopoly in every sense. And so there's not the motivation to have more efficiencies that take place. Now, I asked Matt before the meeting, I said, this may be a little bit of an unfair question, but he said it's okay, so I'm asking him anyway. In the case of Sandy Springs, initially CH2M had the entire contract. And at 5 years in, they decided to let that contract go to competing entities. And I wanted to get Matt's response on how he thought that worked, because now CH2M had to bid along with other competition. And I believe the end result was Sandy Springs saved even more.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So the history on that is, back in the day when Sandy Springs, as I mentioned, was the first city to start up in Georgia in decades, and the legislation let me just say that the legislators have learned some lessons since Sandy Springs about transition periods. But the law at the time said that on midnight, December 1st, 2005, Sandy Springs needed to be a fully functional city. Up until that point, there hadn't been a mayor and council that seated to be able to undertake any business. So Oliver Porter, the gentleman that you saw in that, was leading what effectively was a citizens committee appointed by the governor, but with no authority to bind the future city to anything, that selected CH2M through a competition to start up the city. So I wasn't with CH2M back in the day, but I was following it. So CH2M spent several $1 million completely at risk to set up City Hall, rent the space, hire people, so that at 1201, City Hall was functional. So with great risk comes great reward. The city did hire CH2M, and I think the contract for that first year was about $27 million. After 5 years, the city rebid the contract and allowed people to bid the contract by department. So the Public Works Department, the Parks Department, Municipal Court Support, IT, etc. And they ended up contracting with 6 or 7 companies to do the service, and CH2M's bid for the entire thing was $2 or $3 million more than the combination of the other companies that bid the work. So the city, through competition, saved a significant amount of money. And I think I added up the total value of the service providers for Sandy Springs this last year, and it's something about like $18 million. So from 27 million in 2005 to 2017, they're at 18 million.
In regards to converting the public organization or operations in a city to the privatization of this contract, you had indicated that the options are assimilating the employees into your staff. Is that generally, well, it could be generally the preferred option in this current business climate, and as you indicated, an employees market.
Mm-hmm.
But my concern is, or not concern, my question is quality of employee. If the city indicates that they want you to assimilate the employee base and they're not, and you have quality metrics that you must measure up to, and those employees don't measure up to it, do you train them, or?
Yeah, so we've dealt with that in different ways. Sometimes our clients get part of the contract that every employee shall come over and that they shall be employed for a minimum of X number of years. I mean, we've seen that kind of contract before. We will offer our own opinion as to how many employees we think a departmental operation needs. And so it's really a negotiation between us and the city as to what we do. And so, we'll make our recommendations, but it's ultimately the city's choice and decision about what to do. But if the city wants us to bring over everybody and we find that there are shortfalls in the education level or the experience of the staff, then we will provide them with training and try to bring them up to speed. What we've found is that we'll typically over time get some attrition. And some people love the model. They love the ability to come over to a private company and see the other opportunities for growth that we can bring them. Others may be toward the end of their career and they'll just take that as an opportunity to take it to the house. So what we'll frequently see is over the first couple of years there will be some natural attrition and then we may not need to replace those people.
And I can see less resistance as far as the turnover to the department heads that are not represented. But now the represented employees, when you're negotiating with those unions, if they are to be replaced or downsized because of efficiencies, who's generally at the helm of those negotiations? Is it the city manager or the contracted agency?
Well, we have unionized employees that we've transitioned over, and they remain unionized employees. So we collective bargaining with the union over those decisions.
And you're able to still meet your efficiency metrics and cost savings, et cetera.
Yeah, and we build that expectation into the contract. So the city's aware of what the issues that we face and going through that, and we keep it transparent.
Do you also provide security? Do you have a security department?
You don't want to pay a private company in our business. I know there are companies out there that provide security services as private security entity, but in terms of deputized police, fire, we don't do that.
The reason I ask is that our county building, we have a hired security that patrols the neighborhood or whatever. Plus we have the court system there as well that requires the security.
Yeah, no, we don't provide private security services and we don't do the emergency services of police and fire.
And then based on, you say you do design build, does that include the 6320 program?
I'm not familiar with the 6320 program.
1963, rule number 20, the federal government allowed governments to contract a building. The reason I'm aware of this is in Pierce County, they wanted to do a design build 6320 program, and Wright Runstead was getting the contract, and it was they would bid the project based on the plans presented, and it was the guaranteed. And then they would run it for 20 years, I believe, and then turnkey at the end of that time.
So it's a design, build, operate type of long-term contract. Yes, we've entered into those contracts before as the lead contractor in those arrangements. And we do that for wastewater treatment facilities, because that's a particular specialty that we have. There are firms out there that will do that in transportation space with a road, but that's not CH2M.
And then I noticed you said you do contracts for maintenance like of parks or for the assets. There's a lot of purchases of property that go to like land trusts, and part of that agreement is that they will in perpetuity take care of it, but in the meantime they get ownership of the land. Do you have where the government would still, or the taxpayer would still own the property, but you would manage to confirm that it was being maintained for the conservation purposes?
Right, yeah, we would not assume the asset. The asset would remain a public asset. We would just operate and maintain it over the period.
Do you also operate federal contracts?
Yes. So we have several contracts at military bases where we provide the day-to-day operations and maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Was there a change in culture with outsourcing between how the employees felt towards their community? Because sometimes I've got the impression that our municipal employees feel that they're an in-house management company, and they basically are their own, like it'd be SeaTac Inc.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that culture changes.
You know, I don't think so. I've had one of our managers at Tucker, Georgia, that we started up last year, and her motto is you leave the logo at the door. So our employees are, the shirts that they wear say Tucker, Georgia in that case. And so they act on a day-to-day basis. They're City Hall employees. They work for Tucker. And they really, that they get their paycheck from CH2M. They a certain amount of management oversight and such from CH2M, but on a day-to-day basis, they're providing services for their community.
Thank you.
Going a little further into that culture question, when you're brought in, let's say, taking over a parks department or a public works department, you have a person in charge, you find that he's acceptable to you, but you later find that he isn't able to manage to your expectations. He isn't able to deliver the productivity you're looking for. What happens in a situation like that? Do you try to educate him on how to achieve his goals? And if he's resistant, then what do you do?
Well, we deal with the situation, as it's presented to us. We obviously would rather not have that situation occur, but every once in a while it has over the course of our time. And so we've replaced people when it's become clear, either for our own expectations or for our clients' expectations, that the job wasn't being done to meet those expectations. And so the few times we've had to change out personnel, we have done that. What we try to do most of the time when we're coming into an existing situation, we're bringing incumbent personnel over with us. But what we always do is we bring a CH2M person as our project manager to that location. That person has been trained in the way we do things and has frequently had been doing that service at another location and is taking a career advancement opportunity to come to the new location. So they're already steeped in the way that we do things, and we already have experience with that individual.
Thank you.
Two questions at first. How does this scale to a large land-based, low-population rural county?
For what type of service?
The broad range.
Yeah.
Because the county governments, especially in low-population counties, are always not having money to do what needs to be done.
Right. Well, We work for well over 100 local governments across the U.S., and some of them are in very rural places. Americus, Georgia, so we work, I would say that while we work for some communities that are hundreds of thousands in population, the majority of the communities that we work in are 20, 25,000, 30, 10. We work in small communities much more frequently than do large communities. And these places are often in largely rural counties.
The second's probably thornier. What you're doing seems to run rather counter to the fourth branch, the administrative state. And counties in rural areas in particular are not much wanting to become as much a part of the administrative estate as perhaps the state agencies and federal agencies. Do you see this as sort of breaking the nascent administrative state at the local level, and does that pose additional challenges?
When we come in, we're not setting policy. Because of the experiences that we've had in a number of communities, we will give the policymakers in a community the benefit of our experience. We'll give them the advantages and disadvantages of different approaches, but the elected officials are the policymakers, and we're the implementers. Does that answer your question?
It does in a lot of ways. What we see in a lot of counties is that they're trying to become mini agencies in the departments, especially the community development departments and planning departments.
Mm-hmm.
And they mimic the state and federal agencies and receive grants from them that have strings that help keep them tied to that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of local government electeds who would prefer that that not happen at their level.
Right. Yeah, no, it's, the electeds will give us the policy direction, and we will try to implement that policy. So, different people are going to have different growth philosophies, like you were talking about in planning and zoning. So our goal would be to try to, if we're recruiting to bring people to that place, we're going to try to bring someone that shares that local philosophy.
I want to find out, the Sandy Spring being a wealthy area of Atlanta suburb, and it was not a city. What is your record, and how do you deal with an established city with established problems, with established unions, and many other things, established sewer problems?
Well, so we work for well over 100 communities across the country every day in a contracted operations way, and they're every kind of community that you can think of. I mean, we work for rural communities of 10,000 people, 25,000 people, also working in communities in major metropolitan areas. So we have the issues that you have in poor rural communities. Where I live, Peachtree Corners, we were 40,000 people when we became a city. It's a very diverse community, and it has its own set of problems too. So we have problems. Every community we come into has issues, which is why we get invited to come in. I don't think I'm answering your question still, am I?
One simple answer, which is, how do you deal with unions?
With the unions. Well, so we have taken over a number of unionized operations. We have employees at CH2M that are still part of unions. So we can deal with it, and we have dealt with it. And if that is the community has a unionized workforce and wants to undertake a contracted operations, then we can do that, and we can deal with the unions, and we can maintain their benefits. And it's all, we just have to build that into our cost structure.
What is the percentage of services outsourced to multinational companies versus locally owned companies. My concern would be that these would be outsourced to and sort of transferring control of our local communities to these multinational companies, which, you know, may or may not be a bad thing. But in terms of what you're doing, what sort of a percentage of those services are being outsourced, you know, outside the local community?
All of the employees that we have in our contracted operations live in the communities that we're providing that service. Our call center service, all of our operators in our call center are U.S.-based operators. We, you know, I guess in that sense, we're doing the work in the communities. And the employees, whether we bring them or we take them over, are based in the community.
Okay, thank you for that. I know that was a little bit difficult question. I am a libertarian, so I love the idea of privatization.
Can I take another stab at answering that too?
Sure.
Sorry not to jump into your space, Matt, but so I work for a libertarian think tank too, so you know we deal with this issue all the time. The answer to your question is it depends. So if you're talking about trash services, well, there's no Chinese trash service that's coming over to the U.S. Or, you know, if you're talking about doing public works project, well, maybe not public works. You know, let's talk about tree trimming in city parks. That's going to probably be local. If you're talking about toll roads, well, you're probably going to be dealing with European toll road companies, toll road operators. So it really kind of depends on the sector and the space. And one answer to your question is, if you want a call center based locally, put it in the procurement, put it in the contract. Say, you know, you can be from wherever you are, but, you know, if you're going to have people, they're going to be based here, and if you have a call center operation, it will be, you know, based in the United States. I mean, if you want to go that far, you can do it. Just understand, you know, as an elected or as a policymaker, there could be trade-offs on cost on all those sorts of things.
Roger, you have I have a question. Matt, nice to meet you, and I liked your presentation so far. And I know CH2M well, myself, through, unfortunately, litigation. It's a great corporation, and it's well known for its expertise. And I've heard nothing but good things about it, even in litigation. So, the question is and I'm a local, county, state, federal contractor myself. And so I understand why it's important to have that private-public partnership, because we do keep costs down and we do deliver excellent service. And so when we have mistakes happen and it brings a public perception about that, and I'll just use one that happened most recently, which is Whitefish Energy in Puerto Rico. How do we fix that? And why wasn't CH2M awarded that contract?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, mistakes happen, and certainly CH2M's like every company. You know, we've made our share of mistakes, but you know, we try to minimize those mistakes by the lessons we've learned and the processes that we put in place. And there's an amazing amount of process and procedure that get built into how we do business because of the lessons that we've learned, sometimes been painful. One of the things that I think has been great, my observations of CH2M, is that, you know, when mistakes are made, CH2M stays with the project and gets the mistakes fixed and completes the project. And that's one of the nice things about being able to contract with a large private entity that has substantial financial resources, that they've got the wherewithal to fix a problem if it does come up.
So we do need to move on to the next speaker if we can.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you know why police and fire were excluded from the privatization?
You know, there are companies private companies that do provide things like fire service, and there certainly are private companies that provide private security services. But for CH2M, our legal and insurance managers, risk managers, are not comfortable in going into that space, and we would want to charge extremely high fees in order to compensate for that risk, and it just wouldn't be cost effective for the local government.